Okay, so I have a UFO book tonight. This is Alien Contact, Top Secret UFO Files Revealed by Timothy Good. This is one that I got it in fact, my dad is the one that bought this for me in October 29th of 1997. And this is actually, we were going on a trip to Dulce, New Mexico. And those of you who have been following the channel for a while, you've probably already seen some of my videos where I'm talking about that. But if you haven't, I'll link some of those at the end because this was like, I guess, 3 days before we left or 2 days before we left. So on Halloween of 97, my dad and I were wanting to do something fun for that weekend, and neither one of us had anything major going on. So we made a road trip, just drove all night long up to Dulce, New Mexico to check out see if there was any evidence of aliens or secret bases or anything else. But again, there's more on that on some other videos, so I'm not going to get too far into that. But this is one of the handy things where my dad, being also an English major, we were at Barnes & Noble, and I was telling him kind of what I wanted to look into, and my dad was also curious about things related to UFOs and all. He said, well, the first thing you need to do is pull up the subject index. And that, dear readers, is when I discovered the subject index and the wisdom therein. So anytime you get a book, make sure go straight to that index. And that's a good chance when you're looking up topics like this. We were specifically looking up Dulce, New Mexico and the Archuleta Mesa and all that. So my dad pulled it up and looked straight, flipped over to, let's see. Yep, here it is, right in the D section, Dulce, New Mexico, pages 47 to 50, 51, 56, 57, 210, and 274. And he was like, pay dirt. This is one of the books we need to grab. And this is a pretty good overview of kind of the UFO phenomenon, the UFO situation as of this writing. I think this is from 1988. No, I'm sorry, 1991 and reprinted in 1993. And as I've mentioned in previous books or previous book reviews, I'm something of an alien agnostic. I have not seen proof of aliens. I'm open to that idea. I don't rule that out completely. But I think in order to really, you first have to strain out before to really understand the whole state of affairs in the UFO phenomenon and research thereof. You have to first strain out all of the covert operations. And as soon as you start doing that, really starting to sift through a lot of this data and figure out, okay, what's the misinformation and which authors were deliberately handed disinformation to repeat to people like us, and what are the covert operations that we can quantify, if at all possible, you start being left with a very different picture than just the simple, hey, are UFOs, are they real, and are aliens visiting us? And I think the answer to that is much more complicated than a yes or no. We're typically handed two responses that we're allowed. It's all made up, it's all a hoax, it's all crazy imaginings of UFO weirdos, or it is visitors from outer space driving spacecraft, and maybe the U.S. government has captured some of this technology and is back engineering it. And personally, I think the truth is somewhere kind of in the middle of what I refer to sometimes as the magic show theory of that if someone wants to make it look like there's a UFO phenomenon and wants to make it look like there's somebody coming from outer space, and they are deliberately staging things to make that appear to be the reality, and then how would that influence the public? Now, Timothy Good does an excellent job of not necessarily covering the angle I'm talking about here, but he does a good job of talking about who's credible and who's not, who some of the big players were. Like I said, this is a great cross-section of late 80s, early 90s ufology, as they say, and some of the major players. And it's good to follow up on some of those guys like Bob Lazar and Bob Eschler, I think. And also in here, he mentions Bobby Ray Inman, the former director of the NSA, this guy right here. And and his involvement in the UFO phenomenon. And this is one of the first books I ever saw that tied the NSA into some of that. Not necessarily from they're hoaxing or this is covert operations, but I think that's a real important data point to remember. And I'd be curious, Timothy Good is one of those guys I'd love to talk to now and see kind of where he stands on some of this stuff. But again, great kind of cross-section of ufology back in this day. And a lot of both anecdotal accounts and then pretty well-supported, backed-up accounts. And stuff about like, sorry about my clock here. This is when Area 51 was first becoming a thing, about the back-engineered UFOs and Bob Lazar. And I am personally of the mind, I think Bob Lazar was deliberately chosen to be exposed to some of this stuff, kind of again, the magic show theory, where he was invited to witness some of this stuff, and kind of a certain amount of pageantry was put into presenting certain things to steer his belief system. So when he left, he would disclose all this as though he had experienced these UFO things. Again, not ruling out the possibility of extraterrestrials. I genuinely do not know one way or the other. But again, the more you dig into this, and the more honest authors will usually present a lot of the pros and cons of some of these things. And when you start reading some of that, you start realizing there's some other factors at play. And there's a certain amount of deception introduced in all this. One of the other things that this guy mentions is the role of, let me make sure I'm citing him correctly, Richard Dodie. And Richard Dodie was an OSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer, or I think he was enlisted. And he was in charge of, he was helping with security or counterintelligence on the Kirtland Air Force Base. And he is responsible for a fair amount, yeah, here he is, Richard Dodie, of modern UFO lore. So anytime I see Richard Dodie pop up, and he is still very active now, he makes the convention circuits, he's out there talking about UFOs like crazy, and he's a big proponent of UFOs are aliens, piloted by aliens from another planet, visiting the United States or the world for whatever purpose. But the interesting thing that's documented in this book is his effort they brought in several major researchers. There were some of the more influential researchers of the day back in the late 70s and early 80s, and invited them to Kirtland Air Force Base and then presented them with these documents that purported to show all this secret alien activity. And they allowed them to look at it, but they weren't allowed to copy any of it, take pictures of it, take any notes directly from it. They were just allowed to look at it, and then they took them all back and sent them on their way. And this was all done under the guise of that there's about to be this massive disclosure effort, and you're going to be part of it. So it gave everybody this feeling of, hey, we're part of the special crowd that's getting to see behind the scenes and see that there really is this massive alien presence on Earth. And then none of that ever came to fruition. But all those people that were shown this stuff, I think there might have been a few that were a little wary of that. But even the ones that were a little skeptical still went on to repeat a lot of this information. Linda Moulton Howe was one of them. I forget who all else, but they all went their way and spread a lot of this new kind of UFO gospel, this extraterrestrial gospel, that again became kind of official canon within the modern UFO lore. And I think that's real important to understand that happened, that a lot of the major players now openly admit that it happened, that there was a certain amount of that lore that was deliberately pushed into the UFO community. And again, once you understand that, there's certain little loose threads you can pull out and the whole tapestry unravels. And Richard Dodie is obviously very much aware that that can be done. So he's come back out of the woodwork several times to do additional damage control, where now he'll admit to certain other things to try to then shut down further examination of the role of the U.S. military. Because his thing is always it's extraterrestrials, it's always this other thing. But anyway, no, somewhat rambling review, but I overall still a good book, still holds up pretty well. Some of the stuff in here is dated because, again, this is late 80s, very early 90s when this was written. But again, an excellent time capsule of kind of what the state of affairs was in that time. So I think this is kind of one of those books that's an important piece of that overall puzzle, because especially when you look at when it came out in that whole timeline, I think that's also critical to see when these books were published, what they were saying. And there are certain influential people within the UFO world, like Richard Dodie, and it's always interesting to see different authors and what their treatment of those people is. So anyway, I'll stop there. But as always, thanks for watching and all that. But just remembered, I have a playlist, I believe, all about UFOs, and I will link that at the end of this, as well as some of my information about Dulce, New Mexico. So definitely check that out. And those of you that I know that's triggering sometimes when I say that I'm an alien agnostic, and I'll have people get really worked up about that. But I think, again, in light of the covert operations that have been designed to deliberately confuse people on that front, I think that we have to take a big step back with things UFO and alien related to make sure that we're getting genuine information there and not not reaching a conclusion someone is feeding to us. And one more thing, and I will wrap it up. It's very interesting to see how many intelligence, or like U.S. Army intelligence, Air Force intelligence, and counterintelligence people are also influential people within the UFO community. And I've talked about that in some other reviews, but if you start going through and looking at the number of people, number of authors, and a lot of times that's hailed as like, hey, you can trust this guy because he's former Army intelligence. And anyone who's been around the block a little bit should know unfortunately, you cannot trust Army intelligence. These people are paid liars. And most of them, if they're being candid, they'll tell you that is exactly what they do. So anyway, that is Alien Contact from 1991, reprinted in 1993, probably reprinted again. Top Secret UFO Files Revealed by Timothy Good. Again, good kind of snapshot of ufology circa early 90s. So as always, thanks for watching, and big thanks to the members for supporting the channel.